where we all get a chance to meet and discuss current issues of concerns on our campus, as we also try to provide content that looks around the corner a little bit to emerging issues we're going to face a little bit further down the line. Around 20 years ago, we saw the rise of a phenomena that in the UK we called e-science, and in the US, cyber infrastructure. And essentially, these were probably quite poor terms to describe the growing integration of massive computational and communications power to solve scientific questions. For the last few years, there's been a growing dialogue, that is growing in volume and scope, about what similar integration might mean for academic practice in the humanities and for the institutions supporting that practice. So, to lead a discussion on the future of digital humanities this morning, I'd like to welcome Lucy Appert, who is Associate Director for Instructional Design at Columbia's Center for New Media Teaching and Learning, and Bob Squillace, a Master Teacher in the Liberal Studies Program at NYU and Assistant Dean for Academic Affairs Liberal Studies. A round of applause while they set up.
While we're getting set up, I want to give a quick note on our format. In the spirit of digital humanities teaching and learning and active learning in general, we are going to make a little change to the format and make a new part of the presentation. So Bob and I are going to talk for about half an hour and set some issues up, and then we're going to turn it over to all of you for your questions, for your comments, for your experiences. So be ready. Eat your coffee, plan your exit. Take your nap, but in 30 minutes, y'all are going to be on. So, yeah, we can help to.
The first slide?
Yep. I also want to preface this because most of us in this room are providers of educational technology infrastructure. And that... Oh, going to change the reader presenter. Oh. And we're providers of educational technology infrastructure. And that means that some of you may not, wait for the slide to come up. So, great. Some of you may not.
How do I see my notes?
Okay. We're totally not set up. Some of you, I can hold it, it's fine.
Speaker notes, that
so
shouldn't be visible.
Thank you. Some of you may not have a sense of why you should be listening to this or why this is important for you. So I want to give you a set of reasons, yeah.
Is there a doctor in the house?
Uh-oh.
Somebody that knows how to get notes here and the presentation on the screen.
So out of mirror mode. Oh, in Google. That's the...
Yes.
Display settings. Apple display settings. This is awesome. Active learning classroom right now.
So
making, doing, collaboration,
and then
support. This is awesome.
And now...
Yeah. Not quite working out for us. Hit slide present. Oh, it's in Google though. It is? Yeah.
Should we go to the PowerPoint version?
Sure.
We'll just have to switch the screens here somehow. This is on the other.
I can switch to PowerPoint.
Oh. Yeah, go ahead, try.
I need to change the...
We've already done our first project together. This is great. Okay, so I want to give you some reasons, if you haven't had enough already, for why you should be interested in digital humanities teaching and learning and the impact it's starting to have on your campus. First of all, whether you can see it right now or not, digital humanities is competing for resources with central IT. And this is something that is probably only going to increase. And digital humanities, while it might be seen as an extension of publishing, it actually is beginning to overlap in significant ways with educational technology, which means that digital humanities involves many of the same issues that we are dealing with in educational technology, central infrastructure, and support. And that, such as security, collaboration, storage, hosting, and that means that one day digital humanities work may become your problem. And so with that set up, I'd like to have Bob talk about some of the background at where this movement is coming from and some of the practitioners in it.
Thank you. I want to start by talking about some of the ways that a significant number of people within the digital humanities situate the field, where they see it within the academic landscape. And while not all digital humanists take this perspective, there are quite a substantial number who want to situate digital humanities as a kind of permanent other to the traditional humanities. By other, I mean to look at it as the opposite of whatever the traditional humanities is. There are plenty of people in the traditional humanities who are complicit in creating this oppositional structure. So people who take this perspective, they see the traditional humanities as individualistic, therefore digital humanities as collaborative. They see the traditional humanities as being theoretically based, therefore digital humanities is methodologically based. It's not about a theory, it's about how you actually do things. If the traditional humanities are famously contentious, the digital humanities are nice. And I'm using a word that Tom Scheinfeld used in a blog post that's been picked up to a great extent among the digital humanities community, both in pro and con kinds of ways. If the traditional humanities is about interpreting, then the digital humanities is about making. If the traditional humanities are about fixed entities, texts, theories, interpretations, the digital humanities are about flexible, evolving entities. They produce artifacts that are not created in a way that is unchangeable into the future, but that can always be revised, reconsidered, and changed. And you can go on with these kinds of oppositions. A lot of them go back to the days when digital humanities was something called humanities computing, which goes all the way back to the 1950s. Most digital humanists would say the start of the field is when it comes with a priest named Roberto Busa, who created a concordance for Don Quixote using computational means. When I look at digital humanities today, I don't see a field, frankly. What I see is a movement. And it's the reason for that perception is that the different elements that comprise digital humanities are not very well assorted with each other. What are the different things that people do and call themselves digital humanists? Well, there are people who do a humanistic analysis of coding languages themselves. That's probably the smallest but the most, in some ways, exciting area in digital humanities. There are people who do a humanistic analysis of purely digital artifacts, of social media, of Twitter streams, things that have only existed in online platforms. There are, however, many people who call themselves digital humanists who focus on pre-digital objects but analyze it using digital tools of some kind, network maps, other kinds of visualizations, timelines, that sort of thing, and bring that into teaching as well. There are digital humanists who insist that if you don't write code, you're not a digital humanist. So, Steve Jobs, sorry. The making of tools is how they define digital humanities. You're only a digital humanist if you actually create tools for doing analysis on humanist materials. And then there's a wing of digital humanities that focuses on taking the whole humanities scholarly enterprise and moving it into online platforms. I don't see a common thread here. I don't see a field. I think it's like Arab Spring or the Occupy movement, where there's a clear need that a large number of people perceive, but they don't necessarily have a lot in common with each other. So there's no sort of permanent structure that arises out of that movement. The centripetal forces pulling them apart are stronger than any attractive forces that are keeping them together. Even now, many digital humanists do not work in digital humanities shops. They work in English departments, history departments, other humanities areas. And over time, just as history absorbed the field of cliometrics, the other humanities disciplines, I think, will absorb the digital humanities. So where is this all going? I think a more sustainable model of what the digital humanities will develop into is a kind of division between digital studies and plain old humanities, which will assume a certain digital competency on the part of its practitioners. Digital humanities, to me, is a term of impermanent value. It reminds me of the way when sound came into movies, films that had sound were called talkies for a number of years, and the word film meant silent film. Then over time that shifted, and silent films were designated as silent, and films that had sound were simply called films or movies. I think in the same way, the digital humanities will encompass the humanities when all humanists are using digital tools of one sort or another. The distinction will disappear, and people may talk about the pre-digital humanities or the analog humanities or what we used to do in the analog days or that sort of thing. However, there may be a place for a kind of digital studies field within the humanities that specifically studies things like coding languages and born digital artifacts. That's certainly possible. It may be comprised along the lines of a field like diasporic studies or gender studies, where there are courses drawn from a variety of different humanities disciplines that fit under that rubric. But I think we're all going to be using Camtasia and Gephi and whatever their successors are in 5 or 10 years, and the distinction between a digital humanist and a humanist or humanities, someone working in the humanities, will simply disappear. You'll also note that making tools has disappeared from the model that I'm projecting for the future. I think that in time, making will no longer be seen in itself as a humanities activity. There's no reason to believe that the best apps for humanists are going to have to be made by humanists. The kinds of needs that people studying the humanities have are not so abstruse and so particular that only somebody who is a PhD in the field can possibly understand what they are. I think the natural kind of division of labor that guides so much of work in every area will set in, and people in the humanities will work with developers and designers to create the tools they need, but they don't themselves need to write code in order to be this special thing called a digital humanist. Steve Jobs famously did not write code. I'm guessing that Frank Lloyd Wright did not know how to lay bricks. Maybe he did, but it's not necessary to know how to build the tool in order to create the larger structure that the tool serves. movements do have lasting impacts, and I think the digital humanities movement will inflect the way that people in the humanities work for a long time to come, and in many different ways. And I want to focus on two here briefly, scholarship and teaching. In terms of scholarship, I think the three major areas of impact that we will see in the coming years is a reversal of how publication is refereed. Now, refereeing happens pre facto. In the future, it can happen post facto. That is, rather than an expert panel or an expert reader reviewing a piece of work and saying this qualifies as scholarship in the area, therefore it may be released to the hungry public that is always waiting for humanities publication. The publication can go out whenever the author feels that it's ready, and if it is valuable to people, if analytics show that it is being read, that it is being used, that will serve as the credentialing mechanism for writing in the humanities. There will also be new ways to measure scholarly achievement. For one thing, it will be possible to see whether the student audience is responding to a particular work. Are people using it in their teaching? Are students citing it in their essays? We'll be able to tell when there's a broader infrastructure for humanities digital publishing, whether the impact of a piece of work is strictly within a narrow niche field or whether it reaches out much more broadly, going well beyond what you can do now by looking at indices of footnotes, which is the major way to tell what work influences what person. Then there's the question of new audiences, a public audience. In theory, one of the reasons that digital humanities, traditional humanities books have such a restricted audience is that they're so expensive that no one in the general public is going to buy them. They're only going to be bought by libraries. If online publication is essentially free, how will that change the kinds of audience that writing in the humanities have? I don't know that it will actually have that great an impact, because I think the reason that much humanities publication is not consumed in any fashion by the general public is what causes that spiraling upward of the price of books. If you look at history, for instance, you'll see an exception to the rule. A serious historian can still publish a book at a reasonable price that may be read by a general audience because historians are still talking in a way that is not so controlled by a special set of terminology that the general public can understand it. People writing in English and philosophy, that's not, or comp literature, that's not the case anymore. And until that changes, it's unlikely that the even digital publication will allow for this broadening of the audience, although it certainly would wish that would be the case. It's very easy. Revolutions get co-opted, and it's easy for the echo chamber that is a great deal of scholarly publication in the humanities now to reassert itself. Second, the impact on teaching. Three areas that I think will come to pass within the next 10 or 15 years. First is obvious, the death of the lecture hall. There's no reason, well, there's probably no reason for us to be sitting here now when we could be sitting in another place and streaming this talk to you, except that we are, of course, going to have questions and so forth. And you know, breakfast is nice. But certainly, there's no reason to have the 500-person lecture hall twice a week on a regular basis anymore when the same material can be delivered online. This can change the role of the instructor. Certainly, when I'm going to be teaching in the fall, I'm not going to create all of my own teaching materials. If there is a good screencast on the impact of colonialism and a timeline for it that I can share with students, I will use that. I'm not going to take the time to create my own if something is already out there. If there's a good piece on what publication in Qing Dynasty China was like, how books found their way to market, what the market was, who was reading, who was literate, who wasn't, I will use that material rather than creating it myself. I'll create things myself if I can't find anything suitable out there. That puts me in a different position. That makes me somebody who is not necessarily controlling all of the material in the class, but mediating it. And I think that instructors will have to be more careful not to tacitly endorse the absolute authority of the outside material that they bring into the classroom. Humanities is all about inquiry, and you don't want to say, now this is the real story on publication in Qing China, this is the expert, we're going to take this as a given. You have to keep questioning everything. Where did this person come up with this idea? Is there good evidence for it? Are there other ways of viewing it? What are their theoretical underpinnings, and so forth and so on. Finally, it will be possible to extend the notion of teaching, especially if institutions are willing to reconsider what constitutes a faculty member's teaching load, in that teaching objects that are created for a larger market, that are shared with other instructors or directly with students, either through MOOCs or through other means that are a little more granular, can be considered teaching as well. Teaching is not necessarily being the person in front of the room who gives the student the grade at the end of the semester. This is a future that I think is coming, but obviously there'll be a lot of work in detail to get there. And so now I'm going to throw it back to Lucy to talk a bit about what this infrastructure might look like and how we might get there.
Great. So for those of us who are here, the teaching is where kind of the rubber meets the road, where this last scenario happens. So I want to take that foundation and kind of zoom back out and talk about how and first of all, note that while we're kind of picking on the humanities right now, this is actually, the things that I'm going to talk about are characteristics of the larger active learning movement. And the types of issues that we're going to be talking about that confront people in infrastructure and support are the types of issues that not just humanities bring to you. In our center at Columbia, which serves the entire campus, the medical campus and all of Morningside, we are getting these issues from science classes, we're getting these issues from humanities classes. So anytime you change the way we deliver teaching and learning, you're going to start to have some of these issues. So in humanities fashion, I want to introduce an analogy to help our understanding of the issue. If you think about support for digital teaching and learning, there was one point, right, the LMS. And the LMS is becoming now kind of like the home phone, right, which is that all the homes are wired for it. We have services that depend on it. We have best practices that are geared to it. But it is also possible for people to avoid that piece of infrastructure. And let me tell you the story of my New York City apartment building's intercom system to illustrate this. So like many New York City apartment buildings, we have an internally wired intercom system that allows people to buzz people into the door when the doorman's not there, to talk to people on the outside. In the early 2000s, we decided that we would get that ugly box out of our foyers, plaster it over, and just run this through the phone lines. That's going to be so much easier, great solution, right? So you know where we're going with this, right? Maybe not even 6 months after we did this, the first tenants moved into the building who did not plan on getting a home phone because they were subletters and they were going to be out of there, and suddenly they are out of the infrastructure. That does not mean that they are going to not order food or not get Fresh Direct or not order from Amazon and not have company come over, but it means that they're going to find ways to work around not being in that infrastructure. It's 15 years later, we still have not solved this. I'll just say that. And it's becoming more of an issue. So if we move back and talk about infrastructure needs using this analogy from the digital humanities practitioner viewpoint, the landscape looks kind of like this, right? Which is lots of devices, lots of platforms, things that are here today, gone tomorrow. And for those of us who are working from central infrastructure and instructional support, this can be a really scary landscape. It's great for innovation, but it's really hard for sustainability and standardization. However, these needs like video storage, server sandboxes, repositories, clear directions, are not going to go away. And so I want to return to the intercom analogy to frame why we, as supporters of teaching and learning and educational technology, need to continue to engage in this dialogue and what we can benefit from. So first of all, if you're our building, and this is the new landscape, there is no way that we can connect to all of these devices. But their presence has changed how we select our tools. We are not going to choose a platform that is based on a piece of hardware that's hard to migrate from, that doesn't allow multiple points of entry. So it's been positive for us in terms of how we choose technology for our building. A more negative side of this is that, as I mentioned before, there are more people who are not in our building's infrastructure. And these people are finding ways to continue to get their food delivered when the doorman's not there and to get their Fresh Direct. Sometimes those ways are benign. They're fine. They give them the phone number, they give them their cell phone number, and they come downstairs and let them in the door. Sometimes those ways are not benign. They prop the doors open. And then anybody can get into the building, and suddenly all of the infrastructure that's there to protect all of us who are opting in has been co-opted by these people who are trying to work around and get things done. So having set this up, I want to talk about some ways that we can engage in dialogue with these people who are outside of the infrastructure and may not be coming into the infrastructure, and how in ways that can be mutually beneficial. So Bob talked a little bit about digital humanities remaining the other. And some people in this room and lots of people I've talked to have described to me digital humanities as those nice people I always say no to. And so I'd like to look at some of the reasons that those of us who are in more central roles say no to the digital humanities and keep them in this other role, and ways that we can actually work with and help them in these roles. Now, Bob has talked a little bit about this lone wolf, their tendency to work as lone wolves, and I think this part of this is a legacy, as he discussed, from the research background. I want to add, though, that there is a very important economic component to this, which is that a lot of our infrastructure is imagined around a faculty system that is going away for many people. So while we have this really nice infrastructure that supports full-time faculty and tenure-track faculty who are teaching, many of the people who are practitioners in the digital humanities field are doing the alt-academic route, right? So they may have a succession of postdocs. They may cobble together teaching at several different institutions with working in a museum or working in a library. And for them, opting into our infrastructure can actually be detrimental to their career, because if they're only going to spend 2 years at Columbia, do they really want to start their blog for their entire career in that infrastructure? So I want to suggest that while there may be this lone wolf operator status that can be really frustrating to those of us who go out there and find, this person's running classes out of WordPress.com, that may be situated not just in the research practices of field, but also in some of the realities of what teaching and learning is starting to look like. That being said, I want to move through some of these other things that are presented to us as obstacles, things that we say no to, and ways that we can actually use them to engage. So a lot of times when digital humanities projects come to us, they come to us with a lack of clear goals and outcomes. And this can be really scary for us because it presents in ways of these rapidly changing requirements over the course of the semester. It's October and, we want to make everything public. Or questions around sustainability, where we start to think, how long do I have to keep this Flash thing going for this class, right? So in terms of being able to support in those areas, it can be difficult. However, I want to suggest that we can engage in a consulting fashion with people working in these areas and help them, first of all, by suggesting an iterative design-based approach for projects. So based on our own our own experience doing technology projects, we can help them chunk the work out into what is actually doable in a semester or in a summer. We can help them think of practices like paper prototyping so that they're only trying out one tool or only having their students use one set of tools for a semester. We can put them into out-of-the-box solutions for their first phases and then help them understand what the next phases would look like for more custom work. And in supporting this, we can also help them create clear instructions for their students, put them in touch with those types of instructions that may exist or create them. And also, very importantly, use our experience in assessment to help them create ways of assessing and grading this work as they move their students into project-based learning. All of these practices come back to a bigger service that we can give in consulting with these practitioners, which is to introduce them to the concept of digital literacy, which is to get them thinking about a critical and analytical use of technology and connect them to a broader conversation on standards. So one example of support for this is Mozilla's digital literacy standard. This came out as a product of a community drafting process. The first version was released in October 2013. If you don't know about it, I encourage you to go out there and look at it. There are lots of great maps that you can use. There are lots of kits that people can download and use. But what's great about this digital literacy standard is it begins to articulate for the first time a set of skills and practices around doing technology. And if we can help faculty members move back to articulating what students are getting out of the work that they're doing, what sets of skills that they're getting for it, and articulating clearly assignments and measurable goals, this can be helpful even if they don't come to us in the beginning with measurable goals. Another reason that we say no to them is that they often want to use cutting-edge technology or they want to make unorthodox uses of technology. And so in some ways, this is something that is becomes a real obstacle. We have to tell them no because we can't run these things. But we can advise them on an approach that's based on lightweight tools and data portability, for example, or we can advise them on common standards. So, for example, faculty members come to us and they want to build a timeline. There is this great tool that probably many of you know about, Timeline.js. It's from the Knight Foundation, and it's beautiful, it's polished, and it runs off of a Google spreadsheet. And so what's so great about this is that we can help faculty members do a project where they produce a timeline, but we're also keeping their data free from that data visualization so that they are free to do the next iteration of this project. So if we can start to help them think about planning their projects so that their work becomes reusable in this way, it can help them do better work. Another example of how we can help them in thinking and pulling back from use of tools to more common standards is the example of repositories. So repository needs, I just want to note, are something that have come up on the one hand because people are making things that don't fit into the traditional buckets that we put the manufacturing of academia in, so books or journal articles. And these digital things need to live someplace. They are also often the product of a collaboration, so you don't necessarily want them living on only one person's website. And then if we also move back to the reality of a lot of digital humanities people not being invested in a particular institution and not being sure that they're going to be able to run it off of this homepage for forever, you can see where a need for repositories comes up. So here's a place where faculty members may come to us with a need, and we can say, like, we just can't make a repository for you here. But we can help them make choices. So here are two examples of open repositories that have come up to meet this need. Both of them happen to be hosted by Columbia, but there are other examples out of there. The first is the Columbia's Academic Commons, which has been up for a couple of years. And it's a repository that any student, faculty, or staff member at Columbia or any of its affiliates can deposit their research and have it publicly discoverable. Just a few weeks ago, the Modern Language Association also introduced one of these repositories for all of its members. So that's another option that workers in the humanities have to put their digital work in a place that's findable. Actually, Columbia is hosting this, and our sister center, the Center for Digital Research, is actually going to be the home for this. The Digital Public Library of America, this is a picture of their hub and spoke system, has started to imagine what this landscape is going to look like. And they've created an infrastructure that will allow them to surface objects from these different spoke repositories in a more central place. So we also know that one of the issues for faculty members in putting their work out in some repositories, somebody may never find it, right? They do all this work and no one will find it. So the Digital Public Library of America has also begun to respond to that need. So if faculty members come to us with a need like repositories, instead of saying, all right, here's the tool, or I can't make that tool for you, we can help them by moving them back to some key standards that we've observed or they should look for, right? You should look for a repository that's going to give you a digital object identifier. You should look for a repository that's going to use metadata standards such as Dublin Core that will allow this object to be pulled up through other places like the Digital Public Library of America, or that you can move it on to another repository. And you should, if you're using this repository to make your work public, you should also look for a repository that gives you attribution licenses, such as Creative Commons. So if we move this conversation back from no to here are some things that you can do, we are arming faculty for choice in this changing landscape. Finally, this tends to be the deal breaker for a lot of us. The reason that we say no is because practitioners in this area come to us with a set of student participation needs that pretty much upend all of our infrastructure assumptions. For example, they want permissions and roles that allow students to be equals with the faculty member, to do the type of work that David Wiley was talking about yesterday in creating the course materials for the course. Or they want to publish everything that they've done in the class to the web. And again, as David Wiley was talking about, getting rid of those disposable assignments. And all of this is kind of defeating every single piece of infrastructure that we've created, right? We want to keep student work private and safe. And so the impulse is to say, oh, no, we don't do that, right? However, if we return to the example of the intercom system, these needs are not going to go away. They're not going to say, like, because, oh, well, you know what, I can't make it public, so I'm not going to do that project. They are going to find other ways to do that. And just like the people in my building who are not part of the infrastructure, they are going to find ways that can be better or worse for the whole good of your campus to do that, right? And so I think it's really important, even in situations like this, that we engage, that we tell them best practices for privacy, that we explain why we have the types of infrastructure that we have. And that if they want to go forward with these types of projects, we give them advice on how to do it best, the types of permissions they need to get and engage in. And so I think that all of this brings us back around to the place where this can also be helpful for us. And so I want to close with a look at something that's happening is very interesting as a result of digital humanities that is really going to have, I believe, a positive impact on the recognition of teaching as a profession. So many of you may have seen that GitHub is becoming a place for digital humanities activity. Part of this movement began in the DIY sense of, as Bob was talking about, people making their own tools, going into GitHub, and then putting their projects up there. And around 2011 and 2012, there began to be coherence around a movement for faculty members to put their syllabi and their assignments and other artifacts of their teaching up in GitHub to share with other people, to use for collaboration. So what does that mean? That means actually that faculty are publishing their teaching in a way where we can get metrics on impact. And a faculty member can say, well, you know, I didn't publish anything, but I created this assignment and it's been downloaded 400 times and it's been forked 25 times. This is the type of measurement for teaching that we've only ever been able to have for research. And I would just add that this type of measurement could not have happened inside of the infrastructure that we are providing, right? Because we don't have a way, usually, to let people in to see people's teaching materials. And so as we begin to get some metrics around teaching and all the discussions of analytics, I don't ever really hear a good idea of an analytics of teaching. But as we start to see in people publishing their teaching materials in ways that we can measure impact, that can only have a positive impact for those of us who are supporting teaching and learning in the institution as we raise teaching as a measurable, rewardable field. So on that note, we are going to turn it over to you for your questions, your comments, your own experiences. And we have, we have about 27 minutes or so. Yes, it's in there, and I can also give it to you or send it out. Yeah, sorry. Is there a link to the GitHub? Yes, that is a link. I decided not to. We've had enough trouble here. I don't want to try to go. I don't want to try to go off into the internet, but I can share it with you. That is actually a very interesting. It's a collaboration on digital humanities pedagogy practices that is turning into a paper publication from the Modern Language Association in that weird way things happen now. So yeah. Yeah.
So I have a similar role of working at faculty members, so I appreciate the challenges and sometimes the need to say no, and it pains me sometimes to have to say no, to be honest with you. So riffing a bit on David's talk and yours, do you think that the fact that we have to say no so often may mean that we really need to consider a more radical change in the infrastructure, not just the technical infrastructure, but something that actually speaks to those out on the fringes and brings them to the mainstream and really pressures those who are kind of maybe using the restrictions of the infrastructure to not do those innovative things? Do we need to think about something radical and different?
I think so. I'll answer and I'll give you a chance to answer. I think so. I think it's already starting to happen in particular ways, but I mean, that was also my point in saying that, if we don't deal with this, this is going to become a problem, right? It's only going to take one, actually this did happen to me at NYU, one student's journal, personal journal on a blog being turned public, right? Because the instructor didn't know the settings for this to become everybody's issue, right? So I think that we are starting to get looser tools, and it's kind of outside of the infrastructure, right? They're bringing in blog tools that maybe aren't connected to the LMS or have more flexible settings on them, or bringing in other types of tools that allow for publication like wikis. And so I think that is starting to happen. I don't know that it's ever going to be our role to run the most cutting edge stuff for people. And that may be the best role for some of the digital humanities centers, because I think that most of us really pride ourselves on being able to operate at scale and being able to deliver and be accountable. And sometimes, you have changes that happen with this stuff. So I think that there are going to have to be changes, just because a lot of people are leaving the learning management system to do this stuff, and that's the reality for that our students are existing in.
Yeah, I would just follow up by saying that if the infrastructure is not provided, people will go out and use inappropriate means. I think probably the most vital academic network currently in existence is Facebook, which is not the best platform, but it's the one that everybody's on. And I see all kinds of inappropriate posts flying back and forth, sometimes mentioning students by name, in ways that are at least skirting the boundaries of FERPA violation all the time. So I think that those kinds of infrastructural opportunities need to be given to people, or they will just go out and use whatever tool is available, regardless of how inappropriate it might be.
Yeah.
A follow-up question then, because I was thinking about FERPA too, and I think maybe FERPA is part of the infrastructure, not the physical and technical one.
Yeah.
But given that was drafted in 1972, I believe, I'm wondering about your blog case. I mean, was that a FERPA problem, or was the student really upset about it?
The one thing you know about FERPA is every institution interprets it differently. So it depends. If it's some places, or if it's graded work, or if it's something that you require a student to do. In that case, it could have been. It definitely could have been. It wasn't anything that was graded, but it certainly was something that we had to work very hard to get taken down. But I will say that there's another side to this. So like we're talking about, like the terrifying shame-based, call at 3 a.m. thing that you don't want to get. But there's also another piece of this, which is the data hostage situation that probably all of us have been in, where faculty members go off and they do one of these freemium things, and then they use it over a bunch of semesters, and then suddenly there's a bunch of student data in there that we have to keep paying for this service in order to keep this thing active. So this is the other side of it. Maybe it's totally safe and locked down, but then we've got your data that's forked over here, and they want to keep using it, or the student's thing is in there and it's up on the internet now, and what are you going to do? So I think that there's also the data hostage situation that comes from it as well, even if you don't get that horrifying Google search.
And the area in which I'm not entirely optimistic is the ability of academic infrastructure to compete with commercial infrastructure. To take an example that snuck in under everybody's noses, lexicographers no longer determine spelling conventions. Microsoft and Apple determine spelling conventions because they're the ones who create the spell check programs. So they're a humanities function has been entirely hijacked into a commercial infrastructure.
I wanted to say that I'm a big fan of the concept and practice of openness, but that it can result in data being distributed across public and private servers, places, and that can have perhaps adverse implications for institutional policies. For example, student grades or intellectual property that the institution may have some stake in. So I wonder how we negotiate those kind of consequences and practices with, let's say, institutional policies or laws like FERPA.
Yeah, and so I think for me that is where digital literacy is crucial. It's interesting. There is a student. There's a student digital humanities conference that's based up at Bryn Mawr every year. I think this is the 5th year for it. And this year, the subject of it is data privacy and tracking information and keeping your work, your rights to your work. And so from a digital literacy point of view, this is a really important area for us to talk about technology, not as that thing that you use that sometimes can come back and bite you, but as a set of practices and standards that you need to understand. You need to understand the implications of action. So that's why I really emphasize this idea of starting to discuss things on a digital literacy level rather than a you just can't do this level, right? Here are the things that are going to happen, and here are the implications of those things happening. Now, just on a philosophical standpoint, people are going to disagree about FERPA because you get these arguments all the time, or they're going to disagree about openness. But when you are able to not say like, well, the tool just doesn't make things public, right? But when you're able to move that up to that conversation, I think that's a better position to be in. So I think that we have to change the conversation to more of a technology literacy conversation. And a lot of times we are instructors in that area of helping people understand what that means and helping them understand why we have the standards that we have. So I don't know if that's a great answer for your question, but is that a good start for it?
Yes, absolutely it is. And I wanted to mention as well the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, because within the LMS we're allowed to sample copyrighted works, but outside the LMS we may not have some of those protections.
Right, and I think that's something that as we see faculty members moving to blogs or moving out to do these types of activities, that there's a 50% chance that it will be a breach of student work or it'll be a takedown notice, right? And so I think that is, again, where we have an important work in the area of digital literacy and helping them become more informed about the choices they're taking. And even more importantly, for them to teach their students about this so that we have a more informed population around these issues and people who are better able to participate in the public discourse about them.
Although it's not uncommon when a faculty member in the humanities is presented with a law for that faculty member to quarrel with the law rather than to attempt to comply with it.
Yes, Bob and I have battle stories together about this. More stories of your own. I mean, I think hearing other people's experiences is also important. And also, Bob and I have been teaching for a long time, so we don't mind awkward silences. Then we just start calling on people.
I'd particularly wonder if people's experience supporting work in the humanities differs from their work supporting people in the STEM fields or sociology, social sciences.
I guess I'll start with an analogy too. My background is more in astronomy than the humanities, but I think of the advent of the amateur astronomer. And these days, most new comets and asteroids are named after amateurs rather than scholars. And most of your talk has been focusing on how the humanities have been changing from the inside, but do you see the growth of valuable scholarly contribution coming from amateurs now because of these new tools and new methods?
Yeah, so I think probably physics and astronomy are two of the fields that have kind of changed a lot of scholarly practices. For example, in physics, it's more common to publish your findings on a blog now than to wait for the book version. If it's in a book, it's too old. So I think that, as I said at the beginning, we're kind of picking on the humanities in a way here, but I think this is a real, as Bob said, a movement that's a change in how people do education and how they do what's happening inside of academia itself. So I think that this movement of research into the classroom and students in as equal participants, we're seeing in a lot of different places. And also, when we start to make these digital materials public, as David Wiley was talking about yesterday, we do open the door for amateurs. My center has run a really, really successful MOOC on the Civil War and Reconstruction. Who knew that there were 5,000 people who were super, super excited to hear these lectures? And these are people who consider themselves, a lot of them will write in and say, I'm an amateur historian, or I'm an amateur whatever. And so they are really interested in these learning materials that are out there and helping them, even though they're not inside of the formal academic structure. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on that the drive towards deprofessionalization is a very strong and vital element in the digital humanities movement, and I think a very positive one. It's an everything old is new again kind of situation, where in the 19th century a great deal of scholarly work was created in the humanities was created by amateurs who were called antiquarians, who assembled historical materials, and folklorists, geographers. These were not the province of academic professionals. And the fields became professionalized in the 20th century, but that may well be a temporary situation where the contributions of people outside of the professional structures can be integrated more readily once again.
It does, though, present us with the Wikipedia problem, right? Because if, everybody is a contributor, then who's the expert on it? And so I think that situation is still working itself out in terms of where authority rests. And I think that we're seeing some questioning of the scientific method in terms of journal articles and peer review and things being retracted. I think that there's a lot of review in how we are actually doing things right now. And a lot of these things that we're talking about are part of a more general discussion that you've highlighted, which is people kind of straining at the edges of these disciplines and expertise and trying to figure out ways that the internet lets people in. I mean, really, if you think about the purpose of the Enlightenment was to make knowledge more free. So an encyclopedia, suddenly you could look things up, even though, of course, you'd have to be part of an elite class, but you could look up knowledge that before had been shut away in universities that most people couldn't get into. So if we think about this kind of movement of knowledge, knowledge outward and into hands of people. This is an extension of the type of systems that we've already had set up. We just have to work out how that's going to look.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something about, or say something about GitHub since you brought it up. I didn't realize there was so much use of it now in the humanities. We've been working with a chemical engineering professor to streamline his introductory chem engineering course because he has a large incoming class. And what I understand from talking with him, he's very passionate about using GitHub because it's a collaborative environment. And, a learning management system can't compete with that when you're collaborating with folks totally different, around the world. And it's amazing the stats he can see also and the influence of his, work on others around the world. But there are ways that it ties back because, we're helping him figure out how to get his, set up a cloud environment which can tie into the LMS where he can get all his tools so that he can, the GitHub is the place for holding code and syllabus and other things, but there's still key elements of the LMS he needs, like grading, for example, and how to possibly do an LTI type connection with a cloud-based tool, or at least a single sign-on. So there are, there's a way to bring it back to the LMS to get the key functionality of the LMS. And you can make private comments to students in the LMS. That might be a very valuable thing as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because you're kind of talking about the different communities that are being served. And with the infrastructure of the LMS, our focus is really giving students the information they need to move through a class. But when you talk about something like GitHub, it's, again, in that other place that allows for the external input. And when you think about a project that, like David Wiley was suggesting yesterday, of taking a syllabus as a spine and connecting resources to it, that's a very good environment for doing that, maybe. And then that work is trackable and shareable in a way that doing that work in a learning management system isn't, because you can't let other people in to it. So I think that's a great story that illustrates the kinds of ways that we can use these and also bring them back together.
It also, online infrastructure like GitHub allows what I think will be the rise of micro-scholarship, where you needn't expand or spin an idea that basically could be expostulated within 3 or 4 pages and be a really powerful idea into a 180 or 200 page monograph, because that's the only way to get serious scholarly attention in the humanities.
I think we've also got to change the way we work in central IT, in our central, the holding to the line and use the structure, the infrastructure that we already exists, so that we don't begin the conversation with no. Many of our institutions are working with creating and fostering an R&D kind of area in academic technologies, so that when a scholar in digital humanities or wherever starts to think about a project, hopefully they will think about partnering with us, so that, because we don't have a reputation as, no, you can't do that, but instead, let's think about the best way to do that, bringing in the attributes you already mentioned. And I find that an invigorating place to work within a pilot structure, and keeping it out of the conversation starting with the word no.
Yes, exactly. I don't think any of us like to say no, because we like to help people. I think that's a great point, and I think the energy around LTI is the beginning of, is one of the ways that we're trying to be more helpful and trying to figure out how to bring GitHub in through LTI. But I think that just all of the energy around LTI is this desire to be accommodating, right, and to try to help to meet people halfway at least, or a quarter of the way at least. One more. This is also exercise for Ian.
Well, going back to LTI and your digital literacy comments earlier on, there's an important component here, and that ties to the issue of when you're making these LTI connections, you're also proliferating the issue of data being stored in other places than within the institution. And that's an issue that we're really struggling with at the University of Florida because, we want to accommodate these LTI plugins. And of course, with the two different LTI standards, you also have the situation where, faculty independent of central IT, even though I'm in central IT, we support the course management system. An instructor can meet with a sales rep from any company out there and install the plugin and start doing stuff that we don't even know about. And it's connected to our course management system, and many times those instructors don't understand that because the connection is made with the course management system does not mean that the content is residing within the course management system. And we've had some issues come up with stuff happening outside that we just had to say, sorry, it's gone.
Yes.
So it's very much a part of your digital literacy and bringing, making people aware.
Exactly, and this is where I was saying this could become your problem, right? And this happens every day. I mean, I have a million stories because there are so many ed tech startups that have no place in academia, and they basically just need to get a pilot in a class, and then you've got that data, so you get a data hostage situation. And the other thing is that often our groups are called on to support the activities in these environments. So one thing that I didn't talk about is we've done a couple of projects supporting digital humanities this semester. The timeline is one of them, where we think we're walking in the classroom to support this really cool timeline thing, or in one case, this really cool Ameca installation. And in fact, we are having to give basic instruction on Google Docs first. And so, the question of the support, level of support and technology that students expect from our organization when people go off-road into these new types of tools has a lot of implications for us. And I think that's why it's really important that we stay in dialogue and we're not just the people who say no. So I'll go to the nice salesman who always tells me yes for the $39.99 a month freemium. And that we stay in the dialogue so that we don't get those situations. I think this is an excellent point.
There's also the irony that the very same faculty members who might be virulently opposed, say, to having Coca-Cola on campus will let their students' records be data mined without any understanding that when they're putting things out to a third-party provider, that the third-party provider might do something with that information. And for instance, we're a Google Apps for Education campus, and the Google Apps themselves are data protected, but the Google add-ons in Google Docs are not necessarily data protected because they're coming from a third-party vendor, and faculty members may not understand or realize that. So there is a great education process that needs to go on.
Y'all did it. All right, we made it to 9:45. That was great. Those were great questions. That was a great second piece. So thank you very much.